How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to LOOTastic and another Loot Review, where we go super in-depth with the absolute best, most addicting gaming mechanic of all time, loot, and how well various games implement it. Today we are reviewing the loot in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The loot score will be judged based on these three categories: loot, customization, and replayability. Each are on a 1 to 5 scale, with 5 being the best and a perfect loot score being a 15. Does Assassin's Creed Odyssey deserve a 15? Let's find out. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the 11th, if you can believe it, main installment to the AC franchise that's been around since, 2007, throws you in the shoes of either Alexios or Cassandra and drops you into the story of a mightily torn family with tons of brother-sister, mother-daughter, mother-son, father-daughter, and mother-father rivalries and problems, and there's a Spartan-Athenian war happening. That's also a thing. This AC game is the first of the series that bears the true open-world RPG aspect that Ubisoft has been working towards for many years. There's a ginormous open world, tons of main story, and side quests to pour time into, naval battles return, the combat is actually fun, and most importantly, at least for me, this is the first AC game where you can play the way you want without having to stealthily sneak through bushes for 4 hours, clearly in view of guards who must be blind, only to get caught and be completely overwhelmed combat-wise, being forced to start the mission over. You don't have to play stealthy, finally, in an AC game. All that being said, the main draw for me with Assassin's Creed Odyssey is the incorporation of loot and how loot works and all that. That's the reason I bought the game, not for the story, or the naval battles, or the open world, just for the loot, because loot is fun. Also, you can't beat the Greek world, the Greeks just rock. There is loot practically everywhere in Odyssey, and there's a fair bit of it too. You get loot for doing everything: story quests, side quests, conquests, naval battles, exploring, stealing, daily quests, weekly quests, killing random guys on the street. Whatever you do, you get some kind of loot reward. Loot comes in 4 rarities. White is common, blue is rare, purple is epic, and gold is legendary. And the equipable slots are head, arms, torso, waist, legs, bow, main weapon, and second weapon. The first few hours of the game you'll be dealing with white and blue drops, then you'll start to see some purples here and there. You do get some legendaries early on, but really it's not that hard to come by legendaries. I do wish there was another rarity in there somewhere to lengthen the time it takes to acquire the best gear in the game and build out the character progression loot-wise a little bit more, but it's not that big of an issue really. Around hour 30 of my roughly 80-hour experience, I could equip every slot with legendaries if I wanted to. The good thing here is that if you get an item you like to use at level like 22 for example, then you level up a bit, you can always upgrade that item to your level at a blacksmith, giving it a damage or armor increase so you don't have to stop using a gear piece that you like. So I could, if I wanted to, take the first legendary item I got early on and upgrade it at a blacksmith to my current level of 50 to make it useful again. Now while we're on the subject of blacksmiths, let's talk about what exactly they offer. Besides upgrading gear, you can buy, sell, and engrave when visiting a blacksmith. 80 hours into this game, and I never once, never bought or sold an item. It's much better to break down your items into materials, because materials are super important as it costs a ton of them to upgrade your ship, crew, and gear. Selling items for drachmae, which is Odyssey's currency, so selling items for drachmae, I find is basically worthless because once again, you aren't getting the materials for breaking them down, and it's super easy to get money in this game, as I've never had an issue with money, and now I've got over 150k and nothing to spend it on. Late game, if you need materials to get those last few upgrades you need, you can then spend some of your saved drachmae at a blacksmith for those materials, but each blacksmith only sells a few of them, so you can't just infinitely buy them unless you blacksmith hop from town to town. Now the last feature blacksmiths offer is engraving. Engraving basically lets you add one perk, which are called engravings, to any armor piece or weapon, even legendaries, for a price. You can also engrave legendary perks from the legendary gear pieces you have found onto other gear pieces. This gives the possibility of having 2 legendary perks on 1 legendary item. Once again, it costs drachmae and materials. You unlock these engravings by completing certain objectives and quests and by obtaining certain gear pieces, and all engravings besides legendary engravings have 5 tiers to them. Each tier you reach makes that engraving a bit better. You can view your unlocked and locked engravings in your inventory, and highlighting them will tell you how to go about unlocking the ones you don't have or the next tiers to the ones you do. Most of them can be unlocked without really thinking about them and just playing the game. Throughout my playtime, I only engraved an item like 2 times. It's not a necessary thing you must do all the time, and it's probably more of a late game mechanic, if anything. I can see it probably helping to perfect a build you might be going for later down the line, as there are tons of engraving options, but if you're anything like me, you'll be equipping new gear every 10 minutes when you find an upgrade, thus making the previous item you were using worthless, and there's no point in engraving if you are switching gear out left and right. Engraving feels like a super in-depth, well fleshed out mechanic that might not get used that often by most players. I've spoken with 2 of my pals who also play, and like me, they haven't really messed with engraving much at all. Now, all gear you find already drops with at least one of these perks or engravings on them, something that adds to your stats, for example like plus 5% assassin damage, plus 3% critical damage, or plus 20% poison damage for higher tier gear. Common items drop with 1 perk, rares with 2, epics with 3, and legendaries drop with 2 perks, but they also have a set bonus where if you equip an entire set, you get a really good bonus alongside it. There are tons of bonuses you can get from sets and engravings, some more simple and some that are super dope, from just a large increase in hunter damage to a 25% damage increase to all elites and all bosses. There is a wide variety in terms of how many bonuses and engravings are available for you to find on gear and engrave yourself. That is the vast majority of the topic of loot covered. What's left before I give my loot score of Odyssey is talking about legendary gear in a bit more depth. Legendary gear is mainly what you want to be trying to get, as they offer the best engravings and bonuses, and they basically look the best as well, so that's a plus. Every legendary gear piece, armor, or weapons comes from a specific place. There will never be a time where you loot a random guy and you receive a legendary drop. That's not how it works in Odyssey. It's not like Diablo, where you can get any item anywhere if you are lucky enough. Legendaries in Odyssey only come from quest rewards, main story or side, or killing certain people like cultists and mercenaries. Getting legendaries from quests is cool because usually the item is tied to the quest and it rewards your time spent with that specific mission. Getting legendaries from killing certain people is also cool because in the menu screens you can hunt down specific mercenaries that have the gear piece you want. You can also do this with cultists provided you have enough clues to track them down. The only other place you can get legendary gear pieces is from the Oikos of the Olympian shop, which is ran by a guy named Sargon. You'll find his shop relatively early on in the game, and his inventory consists of a few epic items and 1 legendary. His inventory resets every week, and the legendary item he carries is always a store-specific legendary, meaning the only place you can acquire it is through the Odyssey store with Helix credits, which is the currency you spend real money on. Every week, there is one of those legendaries in Sargon's shop, so if you have the currency he's looking for, you can buy it without dishing out real money for Helix credits. The catch is that Sargon doesn't take a drachmae. He takes a currency called orichalcum ore, which is a rare rock that can be found all around the open world of Odyssey and through completing daily and weekly quests. They are pretty tough to find in the open world if you aren't specifically looking for them, but you can buy a map that shows them all, for Helix credits of course. With 80 hours of playtime and exploring, I found about 100 of these rocks without the map, and that is exactly the amount it costs to purchase just one of the legendaries Sargon sells. Sargon also sells one other item called the Olympian Gift, which costs 20 orichalcum ore, a much better price. This gives you a random epic or legendary item for your character or ship, including items from the store. One good thing to note, you cannot receive duplicate store items, so once you get an item, you won't get it again. You'll always get something new. Once again, it's not needed to do any of this. It's not pay to win either, as a lot of the legendaries you can buy in the store may look cool, but perk-wise they are boring compared to the ones you can get from playing. One thing I do wish Odyssey had, in addition to all of this, is legendaries that randomly dropped and don't come from a specific place. I feel like throwing random legendary drops into the loot mechanic would keep players around definitely after the main story is over. When you get to the place I'm at, and all the main storylines are basically complete, you have a lot of the really good legendaries already because they came from late quests and high level mercenaries. It would be a lot more exciting to keep playing and keep trudging through the huge amount of side missions if there was even just a small chance of getting a cool unique legendary item to drop. It would make the experience that much more pleasurable, knowing that at any moment you can get something you still haven't seen yet after all that time of playing. Or in reality, I'm doing all these side missions and I already know going into it that I'm not going to get anything really worth it loot-wise. Another wish I have for Odyssey is about how the legendary loot looks. All in all, the loot looks great, sure. But in a game where there's characters who have demigod-like abilities, and there are mythical creatures and places, you would think the gear you get, especially legendaries, would look the part. Now there are some that do, but there are very few and far between. Most legendary gear pieces look only slightly different from some epic gear pieces. They don't look quite legendary enough. Maybe give a legendary sword a cool particle effect, or a legendary armor piece a sweet glow. It just kind of feels off when you take down a mythical beast in like a crazy fight and then you get a sword that just looks like a slightly varied golden version of a sword you've already seen. My favorite weapon of choice right now is the Mallet of Everlasting Flame, which gives me plus 15% warrior damage, plus 20% fire damage, and converts all my weapon damage to fire damage. But what's even more important is that it actually looks cool when you have the weapon out and are using it. It bursts into flames. Awesome. And this really isn't that legendary because if you just engrave fire damage onto any weapon, it'll burst into flames when you're using it. So it's not necessarily the mace that is specific to fire, but at least it comes with fire. So there is some legendary aspect to it, if at all. Unfortunately, the coolest looking items exist only in the item shop, where you have to spend real money on them. The Bident of the Underworld is a flaming underworld-inspired spear that looks like it came directly out of hell, and the Blade of the Ephemeral is a ghostly sword that emits supernatural light. But they each cost about $2.50, and the lowest amount you can spend on Helix credits is $5, so that's $5 out of your pocket just to look insanely cool in-game. Instead of making these shop-only items, actually putting them in-game and tying them to a mythical quest or something of the like would have been really intriguing, I'm sure. It's just disappointing to see the best-looking gear only available as real money purchases. All in all, Assassin's Creed Odyssey's loot is fun. Loot progression is exciting, although I feel like an extra rarity would have helped in extending the character progression a bit more into the game. Tracking down targets to find gear you are looking for is addicting and challenging, and most of the legendary quest rewards are worth it, even though they may not visually look like they are. Being able to spec a build the way you want, play the way you want combat-wise, and engrave different perks and bonuses to each and every gear piece your heart desires really opens up the playing field when it comes to perfecting your character, even though it feels like a feature for players playing on harder difficulties rather than your average Joe playing on normal. Remember that Odyssey is an open-world RPG and not a loot-based game specifically, so we are going to rate its loot as such. So on a scale from 1 to 5, I give the loot in Assassin's Creed Odyssey a solid 3. Half of the loot game for me and a lot of others is how good loot looks and how cool you can get your character to look. Locking a lot of this feature behind a paywall definitely brings its loot score from a 4 to a 3. Now, onto the second part of the review, one that will be much quicker than the loot portion, and that is customization. While this part of the review doesn't focus on loot specifically because, well, obviously you can customize your character with loot you pick up, that's the sole purpose of loot, but customization is super important when it comes to personalization and gameplay. It helps make player experience different from one another, makes you feel like your character is yours or is you, rather than everyone looking and playing the same. What other kinds of customization is there in Odyssey other than the loot grind? Well, gameplay-wise, you have tons of skills that all focus around one of 3 gameplay styles and damage: Hunter, Assassin, and Warrior. You get 1 skill point every time you level up, 1 skill point from secret tombs, and there is no level cap, and most skills can be upgraded more than once to increase effectiveness and usefulness. You don't have to play Odyssey with stealth at all if you don't want to build your character that way, or you can split your points within the 3 playstyles evenly and be a jack of all trades. I went with the warrior and assassin ability trees the most, and at level 50, managed to unlock all the skills in both trees while still having some sprinkled in on the hunter tree. There is a lot of really good skills that I just don't use that I see other people gushing over, like the predator arrow that you can control midair in slow-mo for powerful damage, yet I've only used it once or twice. I love two-handed heavy weapons and dealing out fire damage, while others may utilize quick daggers and poison effects. Also, once you hit level 50, you unlock mastery levels, which let you fine-tune your gameplay style and build, super in-depth like. And for a small amount of drachmae, you can reset all your skill points whenever you want if something didn't work out or you feel like changing things up. I won't go too into detail about all the customization skill-wise because that's just not what this review is, but do note that there is tons of customization gameplay-wise and it shows. Customization cosmetic-wise is pretty good too. There is transmogrification, which if you don't know is the term for changing the way gear looks without changing the stats. If you like the stats on one helmet, but visually it looks like you pulled it straight out of a dumpster, you can change it to look like a different item that you've previously obtained. Personally, I didn't use this feature until I was around level 50 because I like the visual progression of my character a lot. Picking up new gear every few minutes only to change it to look badass is not my thing. Going from bare skin and towels to heavy gold and legendary armor is an addicting and exhilarating part of the process for me, but that is just my opinion. Having this feature is definitely a plus because I'm sure tons of people, unlike my weird self, are using it all the time. Odyssey gets a 5 out of 5 for customization. Really enjoy it. Good stuff. Good fun. Good visual progression. Good job. The last pillar of discussion for this review is the subject of replayability. Now, in my honest opinion, I don't think the devs really had replayability in mind because once again, this is an open world RPG, not a loot-based game. You play as a character, build them up, make important story choices, do side missions, and build your character the way you want. The freedom Odyssey gives you with its ability trees and perk customization takes away the necessity of replayability or even wanting to start the game completely over again. You are never locked into skills, never locked into gear, and you're never really locked into story decisions if you use multiple saves. I think overall, playtime is huge. I plan on going back in and finishing the game 100%, if not close to it, and that's the first time I've ever wanted to do that for an Assassin's Creed game. I don't think replayability really matters in Odyssey like it would in games like Borderlands, for example, therefore I'm just removing it from the equation completely. Odyssey isn't terrible or fantastic for replayability, it's just not needed. And that wraps up the Assassin's Creed Odyssey loot review. The first loot review done and out into the world with a score of 8 out of a possible 10. One thing to note before I go, this entire review is based off of the launch game. I have yet to play any of the DLC, so if changes or additions were made through DLC that were not referenced in this video, that is why. Now, if you're anything like me and loot is your main draw in gaming, I suggest picking up Odyssey. You'll get tons of enjoyment out of it, and while it's not a hack and slash loot lover's dream, it's still a ton of fun to sink countless hours into gameplay and gear-wise. But that is it for me and this loot review. If there is something you think I overlooked or you have different opinions, share them with me down in the comments. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about Odyssey for sure. As always, this video was brought to you by LOOTastic, where you get all the legendary loot news and info free of charge, no grind or limbs required. Like the video for a town portal scroll, and subscribe for an extra eyeball that increases vision by 4. Until next time, happy looting.